Here we are. So, hey, hello everyone. Welcome to another session of the Leuven seminar. Today we are pleased to receive Marco Rampazzo Bazzan and David James for a talk and a discussion on Fichte's political philosophy. And before I introduce the speakers, I want to invite you to turn on your cameras. Of course, it's not mandatory, but it's an attempt to reproduce the environment of a real seminar. So if you can, you are invited to do so. So our speaker of today is Marco Rampazzo Bazzan. He's associated professor in the Federal University of Espírito Santo in Brazil. And he has several publications on Fichte's political philosophy. But also on Rousseau, Marx, the Marxist tradition in general. And particularly relevant for the topic of his talk today are his articles published in Fichte Studien, Unter der Konjunkturdenken, Fichte als Auseinandersetzung mit Machiavelli, published in 2012, and Das Referat by Fichte, published in 2006. He's also author of a monograph entitled The Rousseau Prism, or The Rousseauian Prism, Fichte's Perspective on Politics between the Stadtrecht and the French Revolution, published in Italian in 2017. Marco will deliver a talk. Today, he will deliver a talk entitled Machiavelli's Impact on the Political Thought of the Late Fichte. And the respondent to Marco will be Professor David James, who is a reader in philosophy at Warwick University. David James has also extensively published on the political philosophy of German idealism. Among his book on Fichte, we can mention Fichte's Social and Political Philosophy, Property and Virtue, published in 2011, and Fichte's Republic, Idealism, History and Nationalism, published in 2015. More recently, he published a book on the concept of property in German classical philosophy, Property and its Form in Classical German Philosophy. That's the title of his book, which has been published last year in Cambridge University Press. So Marco will give his talk for about 40 minutes. Then we will hear David's response for around 8 to 10 minutes. And then Marco will briefly respond to this response. And then, of course, we will open the space for the Q&A. After the Q&A, we will leave the Zoom, the meeting room, open for more informal conversation. So without the recording, so you are also invited to stay and share this moment with us as well. Without any further comments, thank you again, Marco and David, for accepting this invitation. And Marco, the floor is yours.
So, good afternoon also to everybody. I'm glad for the invitation, and I thank Karin, Luis, Manuel, and David to accept to be as my discussant for my paper. A situation that really is flatters and honors me. I apologize for my English that is very poor, so that I think that it's better that I share my text on the screen to permit or to help the audience to understand what I try to say today. So I text this. So, and I try to read the text. In this talk, I did into the profound impact of Machiavelli's oeuvre on Fichte, particularly the writings and lectures that followed the publication of his essay in the patriotic journal Vesta in 1807, such as the Rechtslehre, 1812, and Staatslehre. Central to my argument is the assertion that Fichte's rehabilitation of Machiavelli transcends the realm of mere occasional writings. Rather, it provides a crucial means to unravel the underlying core elements of both Fichte political philosophy and the political essence of his philosophical praxis. So we'll show that the impact of Fichte's encounter with Machiavelli's work through the prism of the vague category of summons, so in German Aufforderung, that Fichte introduced in 1796 in his Foundation of Natural Right. Fichte defines the summons as a call to act, a call to realize one's free efficacy. In 1906, Fichte recognized that the summons is made by one subject to another, urging them to engage in free activity. The real-world phenomenon he has in mind is education, rather than political rights, and the ultimate ends aiming to bring about the free efficacy on the rational being to whom the summons is addressed. On this way, I suggest that understanding the summons is the key to grasping the political dimension of Fichte's writing and lectures, such as the essay on Machiavelli, the addresses to the German nation, and the lectures on applied philosophy. I argue that this work can be understood as specific summons calling the audience to act in the form of what I would like to define a counter-summon or counter-interpellation against the dominant discourse of the government. That illustrates the ideological dimension of these writings and lectures, which characterize Fichte's political writing during the wars of liberation against Napoleon between 1807 to 1813. In the first part, I will demonstrate, or try to demonstrate, how Fichte's essay on Machiavelli illuminates his intricate engagement with the ideological landscape of contemporary doctrines of right, aiming to underscore the profound significance of his subsequent political endeavors. These endeavors include appeals, calls, summons to the Prussian government, German public opinion, and the collective will of German people. In the second part, I will focus on the Zwingherr in Fichte Diary, Diarium, and lectures on applied philosophy, also Staatslehre, of 1813, weaving this character as an emblematic outcome of Fichte's encounter of Machiavelli. In Foundation of Right, Fichte states the purposelessness of the summon is conditional on the understanding and freedom of the being to whom it is addressed. Therefore, it is crucial to identify the audiences to whom Fichte addressed his talks and writings. This point helps us to understand the real sense and purpose of his rehabilitation of Machiavelli. So, this essay has been published in Jan 1807 in the first volume of the patriotic journal Vesta for friends of science and art. The decision to place this essay in this journal suggests that it was intended not only for an academic audience, but also for a broader readership. Fichte was not merely interested in contributing to a purely academic exegesis of Machiavelli's works. Rather, He was convinced that Machiavelli's teaching could contribute something essential to the judgment of his time, which had completely escaped the king, Russian king, and his advisors. In 1807, Prussia was at war with France. After the defeat at Austerlitz, Napoleon's alliance with German principalities and the formation of the Confederation of the Rhine, which united Bavaria, Württemberg, and Baden in 1806, the independence of the Kingdom of Prussia was in serious jeopardy. Following the devastating defeats at Jena and Auerstadt, the French army had occupied large parts of Prussian territories, forcing the king to move his cabinet to Königsberg. Under these circumstances, Fichte could not assume his professorship in Erlangen and decided to go to Königsberg, where he was temporarily appointed as professor. His decision was based on the desire to influence the government decision and contribute to judgment of the German public. After the Peace of Tilsit, Fichte returned to Berlin, which was occupied by the French at the time. There he wrote his address to the German nation, and a condensed version of 2 sections of his essay on Machiavelli was published in the edition of 1808. By inserting these sections, Fichte makes it clear to his readers that censorship harms the common good of the people. His intention in writing both the essay on Machiavelli and the Reden was to denounce the emergent but largely overlooked danger. In this sense, this writing can be seen as appeals, calls, summons, and to action, a Forderung, from a scholar to open the eyes of those who may not have recognized the seriousness of the situations. This call of Forderung was literally understood by Clausewitz as such at the beginning of his anonymous letter from January 1808. He writes, he mentions the Aufforderung, talking about this essay. Considering Clausewitz's letter, it's not surprising that in spring of 1813, when the definitive war of liberation against Napoleon began, this essay was published a second time for the journal The Musen. Shortly thereafter, Fichte delivered lectures on applied philosophy, so published later as Staatslehre, which were, and it's important to understand what it followed. It is noteworthy that Fichte's aims was to influence various layers of Russian public opinion. As the essay accompanies the wars of liberation against Napoleon, it becomes particularly significant for nationalist circles. This is of the utmost importance, not only to trace its impact history, but also to understand the problems that the Machiavelli essay posed to Fichte scholars, particularly after the Second World War. And it is to mention that an important document was published for the first time in the Gesamte Ausgabe in 1995 under the title Realbemerkungen über Machiavelli, Real Remarks on Machiavelli. Those remarks indicated that Fichte was particularly concerned with understanding Machiavelli's perspective on his own era and that he finds in Machiavelli an interlocutor to reflect on Prussia's former situation. That is important. Then, I'd say that Fichte was not merely interested in contributing to an academic exegesis of Machiavelli works. He was convinced that Machiavelli teaching could contribute something essential to the judgment of his time. It's not, and in this operation, this rehabilitation, Fichte is concerned with separating Machiavelli's teaching from Machiavellism. And this Machiavellism blinds the eyes of most of his contemporaries, so they cannot understand what is still relevant in Machiavelli's teaching. Fichte's rehabilitation serves the goals of presenting the Florentine as a completely legitimate interlocutor. It is indeed about not a summary application of some maxims, but the institution of a dialogue that presents Machiavelli as contemporary witness. This is a quote of Claude Lefort. This condition, the greater difference from Machiavelli's times was that in Italy at the time, the people had not yet submitted to the rule of the law at all. This condition also applies among the Germans, so that this part of Machiavelli's teaching on how to bring a reluctant people under the yoke of the laws is settled for all age, for the Prussian time, for the era of Fichte. Another aspect that is very important is that Machiavelli is an example for Fichte. This exemplary performance is what Fichte strives for through his writing, while at the same time making it difficult to classify the Machiavelli essay simply among his publications. It seemed to have more to do with what Fichte understands as applied philosophy in 1830. The difference lies in the aforementioned call, Auf Fordern Summon, which is primarily directed at the king and his government. This is also the point of the change in Fichte's evolution. For Fichte, the most significant difference from Machiavellism lies at the development of the political science and is characterized by the tragic division between culture and politics, as denounced by Rousseau in his first discourse. It is thus on the ideological level previously mentioned that the particular writing of Machiavelli can truly be understood. The anti-Machiavellism defended by Friedrich the Grosse in Prussia, as well as his enthusiasm for French culture, prevented the consideration of Machiavelli as a legitimate interlocutor and the perception of the threat posed by Napoleon. Then, the sections on Machiavelli's republicanism and paganism address this prejudice to understand the core of the essay, namely to clarify to what extent Machiavelli's politics can still be applied to our times. Prussian foreign policy still has much to learn from Machiavelli's teaching in the field. That's the point analyzed from Mark. In Fichte's view, the ideological anti-Machiavellism of the Hohenzollern and his ministers led them to inadequately consider the realities of political machination and the interests of the neighbors. Had they not been blinded by this ideological lens and paid closer attention to Machiavelli's teaching, they might have been able to prevent Napoleon from occupying Prussia. Fichte may be emphasizing here the necessity of a realistic and pragmatic approach in foreign policy that is not guided by ideological prejudice. Then I shift us at this part on Machiavellization in the literature on Fichte. And the point is, Fichte writing could thus be understood on an ideological level as a political act in which he attempts to rehabilitate Machiavelli in a contemporary context and apply his teaching to the political challenges of Prussia. As Rubens Rodrigues Torres Filho remarked in the Brazilian edition, the interpretation, the tone of Machiavelli's reading by Fichte permeates his essay from beginning to end and influences the translation of excerpts from the prints that Fichte provides. In these ways, Fichte provides an example of what it means to write about a political author, that is, to write about politics, and more so, and this is the point, to write politically. The political aspect here emerges from the definition in the closed commercial states. Yes. Then, through engaging with Machiavelli, Fichte learns to ideologically and politically urge our father, the king and his advisor, to serve the common good of their people. And if this fails to happen, it calls upon the people to take their own destiny into their hands, supported by the divine majesty, rights of faith and world government. There's not worldly worship that man can bring to the high tyranny over our destiny then, and I quote, the belief that it has been generous enough to endow us so that we could make our own destiny. On the other hand, it is blasphemy to assume that under the rule of such a being, what alone has worth in man, clarity of mind and firmness of will, are not forces, but everything is decided by blind and irrational chance. Reference to divine government of the world as what appears at the end of the Doctrine of Right in 1812, where Fichte has indicated to his students how the origin of state power and justice and government action were unfathomable, unerforschlich terms for the pure doctrine of right. In fact, they belong to the political dimension, and from this perspective, it can be stimulating to consider the lectures on applied philosophy of 1813 as an action of the ephorate, no longer definitely part of the former constitution, but rather an essential part of a community aspiring to build and establish a real state of reason or a self. In this regard, the figure of the Zwingherr is paradigmatic in many ways and allows us to understand the impact of the encounter with Machiavelli, which has animated the rehabilitation in 1807. Then as the second part, so on Zwingherr. In the spring of 1813, Fichte addressed his lectures on applied philosophy in a precise political context. The Prussian government is preparing and calling on the German people for a war of liberation against the French Empire, and Fichte sets out to shape a reflection in counterpoint to the dominant ideological patriotic discourse. From this perspective, his lecture of applied philosophy can be understood as political counter-appeal that is a way to influence events to pave the way for a true constituent process by creating a community of intentions within the framework of the action of the wise public as an embryo of the self-awareness of the people called upon to form themselves. Now, discussing the institution of the realm Reich of Vernunft, Fichte introduced a new and enigmatic figure, that is the Zwingher. I say new because it's absent in previous writings. We define it as enigmatic because commentators do not seem to have questioned the reason for the recovery of this term for the late Middle Ages, which by the end of the 18th century sounds obsolete, if not absent from scientific literature. A look at existing translations highlights its enigmatic treatment. In them, the Zwingher becomes despot, a term that, on the contrary, was commonly found in patriotic writings, as well as in scientific treatises at the time, particularly in authors that Fichte knew very well, such as Kant, Rousseau, and Montesquieu. Then, however, those are the only two options between which the translators can choose. The problem lies in the fact that Fichte clearly distinguished the Zwingher he talks about from both the tyrant and the despot. In the lecture of 1813, he explicitly talks about the tyranny as a degeneration of the Zwangsherrschaft, and while this distinction could justify its translation as despot, it becomes problematic at the same time because Fichte opposed the realm of reason towards which the Zwingher must pave the way to despotic regimes, both in the doctrine of right and in his Diario. The criterion for differentiating them lies in the distinctive purpose that characterize educational institutions within the states. If in despotic state blind obedience is educated to dogmatic disciplination, in the legitimate states, according to the right, it is where the enlightenment process is allowed, the goal is to form freedom, that is the capacity to autonomously set ends. Ultimately, the two options available to the translator have the inevitable effect of changing terms that the philosopher distinguish, thereby obscuring the significance of original character of his thought. In my hypothesis, studying the figure of the Zwingher as a semantic neologism allows us to clarify the real impact of the encounter with Machiavelli, some of the most controversial aspects of Fichte's later political writings, namely the reconsideration of providence, the divine government of the world, as well as to understand the philosopher's ambition to influence events of his time. The Zwingher defines a specific mission for the King of Prussia, and it is part of the historical philosophical plan inherent in politics at the sphere of realization of rational right. If the mission defined under the term Zwingher had been fulfilled, Friedrich Wilhelm III could have made history. In other words, by becoming Zwingher to Deutschland, he could have acted toward the institution of the realm of reason. As in the address to the German nation, Deutschland und Deutschtum expresses the lectures of 1813 a reality that does not exist yet as historical entity, but rather indicates the direction of a virtual nation that is of a constituent process for the German peoples and societies. The ambitions of Fichte's applied philosophy is precisely to stimulate and influence the formation of this nation in its making, starting from the event constituted by the mobilization for the war of liberation, creating an understanding of events within the wise public. Then Fichte first writes Zwingher in his diarium in spring of 1813. The interests of diarium does not lie in its treatment of the unprecedented, but rather in introducing us to the conceptual laboratory of the philosopher. That is, in reading his reflection without suspecting the action of Machiavellian attempts or forms of self-censorship. The lectures on applied philosophy should be seen as the result of an original attempt to think about one's present, starting from the mobilization for wars and the ideological production that accompanied it. We'll say today, I say attempt because Fichte admits to wanting to text facts and reflections developed in the past, assuming in the front of his students the risk of being wrong and betraying the trust that his student I have had in him by allowing themselves to be guided, led in the formation of their judgments. As evidenced by some notes that Fichte writes when interrupting his courses in February 1813, writing a diarium responds to the requirement of self-discipline, that is, to give oneself a few rigorous rules to maintain attentive behavior in the exercise of practice of thought. This self-discipline was supposed to help him produce the energy of living discourse, to not succumb to fantasy, that is, to store feeling or passion that arise in people out of fear of the unknown, clouding their vision of the future, that is, their judgment. The unknown to which Fichte alludes is nothing other than the uncertain future that Prussia faced in those days. The defeat of Napoleon's Grand Army in Russia and in the winter of 1812 had opened a new chapter in history. At the end of January, Friedrich Wilhelm de Dritte has moved his court to Bratislava, and from there issued several provisions preparing for the declaration of war on March the 16th. And the appeal unmanned fought to my people. This is a real important point. And the following day, Fichte questioned his specific duty in this context. So he decides not to suspend his classes, but to change the course topic from philosophical encyclopedia to applied philosophy. And applying philosophy is nothing other than reflecting on one's own present as an event to which the philosopher must give meaning and against which they must position themselves to create a new community of speech and intention as the seeds of the nation in the making. Initially, by interrupting and then restarting his lectures, Fichte directs his speech to an audience composed of students who are about to join the Prussian armies. Fichte said that they are united by the feeling of friendship because they all want to conduct sincere research. And he proposed to understand the Wissenschaftslehre as a new way of seeing the world that arise by considering how phenomena appear in consciousness and understanding that ultimate foundation is not in things but in being, not in the known, but in the verb. And I think I have to go faster. In summary, applying philosophy involves an exercise of self-discipline and self-reflective scrutiny capable of protecting against those passions that could cloud judgment about the present, and which are rooted in the blind veneration of what is historical. So, this finger is first, its birth as concept is on April the 19th, 1813. And Fichte connects with the final observation of the doctrine of the right. The contradiction finds its problematic composition in the establishment of educational process. The thing here is arrogant or factual king. He must be an educator to the point of becoming superfluous as a holder of coercive power. It is not so much a return to the thesis of the Bestimmung of der Gelehrten. Then, reflecting on this matter, Fichte interprets Arndt's patriotic writing zwei Wörter über die Entstehung und Bestimmung der deutschen Legion. It reflects on the ideological mobilization in the writing. It comments on the passage where Arndt calls Napoleon a tyrant, and here Fichte indicates Zwinger, admitting its existence. His reflection applies to the existing development, the unfathomable realms, by the a priori doctrine of the regional sovereignty and justice in historical government action. The reflection is political insofar as it deals with the realization of right between philosophy and history, historical philosophical level. The a priori concept of right serves here as criterion to guide both the action of individuals and the judgment of the political action of the King of Prussia. Fichte then judges Friedrich Wilhelm's latest provision to be just, meaning appropriate for achieving liberation and thus full independence. But that does not mean that subject or citizens should blindly obey the monarch. He still does not believe that subjects should unconditionally obey the king, as suggested by patriotic fervor. Fighting to restore the old order would make no sense. The legitimacy of the king's mandate or the duty of obedience of citizens must be linked to the new order that is intended to be instituted in case of victory over Napoleon. This is also the space for the countercall to project as another end that the intention of the king. At this point, one can fully understand the relevant digression that directly concerns and constitutes the subject of the lectures on the concept of true war. Fichte presents it as one of the rare occasions on which science and government share the same perspective. Now Fichte refers to the edict of April 21st, regarding the people's militia, which Carl Schmitt sees at the foundation of partisan warfare, and the first time in history when a king calls for that. Each citizen was called to resist the invader with any type of weapon, not to buy them under any circumstances, and organize autonomously with others when the police could not provide any guidance. If Carl Schmitt sees this as a change in the nature of war, Fichte sees it rather as a constituent process toward the foundation of a new order, that is, of a state no longer in the service of the great landowners, but of the people fighting for freedom. In summary, for the war of liberation to be just and true, it must be a war for the progress of education and development. Education towards freedoms constitute the basic orientation of the Zwinger, leading the German Legion, when established Germanhood, is nothing other than forming the still absent nation based on the concept of right dues from the or by the Wissenschaftslehre. The Zwinger will be the one to accomplish this mission, and only Friedrich Wilhelm III can do so now, as he paved the way for the constituted process of the German people, by or through the appeal to my people. The mission of the Zwinger is temporary and legitimate only in this precise juncture. Clearly, Napoleon is much more than a mere adversary here. Embodied in the new form of despotism, he represents the true countermodel to the Zwinger's Deutschland. The constitution of the French Empire as shows the limits of mere formal respect for the human rights, paving the way for an even worse authoritarian draft than those experienced in the ancient region. Napoleon has destroyed the internal institution of the French Republic to the point of creating a supposedly real new dynasty. To fulfill its historical mission, to become Zwinger, it must take the same path in reverse, conjuring the Napoleonic universal monarchy and founding a new republic. Then to close, Manuel, the time.
You have a couple of minutes more, yeah.
2 minutes to close. Then, distinguishing itself from the all absolute or hereditary monarchies and radically opposing the form the new despotism embodied by Napoleon, the Zwinger presents itself as a prince who acts in accordance with the law, with the right, aiming to become superfluous in the exercise of command. Holding sovereignty by the will, destiny, reason calls up him to govern a constituent process to institute a new people. In fulfilling this dual mission, he seems to combine two figures forged by two authors that Fichte has read with intention, with passion, Machiavelli's New Prince and Rousseau's Legislator. If, following the example of Cyrus, Moses, Romulus, Frederick William had to use the opportunity provided by war to introduce a new form more suited to the German nation, insofar as he must institute a new people, the Zwinger fulfills the mission of Rousseau's Legislator, to institute a nation without being part of it, and to act on the first type of laws those that represent the true constitution of the states. Emphasizing the present nature of the mission to establish a new order, Schmidt has seen in the Zwinger the translation of sovereign dictatorship. However, the Zwinger must not only institute a new constitution, but it must also promote popular education, this progress in the Enlightenment. In other words, Fichte seems to act as a member of that natural or observating effort he had spoken at the end of the doctrine of right. Wiser, able to act in accordance with the concept of right and justice beyond any institution or public constraints, which is always subject to corruption. If the entry in towards marks the transition to the constituted moment, Fichte's argumentative strategy is configured as a kind of counter-appeal to the Germanation, which translates the king's appeals to the people into his concept of right deduced by the VL. This counter-appeal, on the one hand, reconnects with the central function of Yen and Cole, a fordering to promote the purpose of sociable rationality. On the other hand, it translates the king's appeal to my peoples from the call to the nation that concludes the addresses to the German nation. The opposition in the way of viewing world is founded and connected with an opposition in the way of viewing human life in society. The recovery of the term Zwinger is part of Fichte's argumentative strategy, or as we're talking with David's use of languages, and must be understood based on the distinction between living and dead languages in the addresses to the German nation. The Zwinger constitutes a paradigmatic form of applied philosophy because it aims to transform reality. Its status is hybrid, historical philosophical, insofar as the purpose is set by reason, while historical contingencies provides the means. It is a creation of political imagination that seeks to intervene in the realm of arbitrary constitution and exercise of sovereign power. That is, fortune, destiny, divine government of the world. If in Fichte's time providence was often associated with Napoleon's action, the Geist, Fichte's attempts here to connect it with the creation of a new possibilities within the framework of free actions. Had he acted in accordance with the mission he had favored, Friedrich Wilhelm would have become a Zwinger, but only if the potential people had been constituted in terms of Deutschheit, becoming what the Reden as simply announced as possible. In Paulo Freire's words, un inedito viaggio, an untested possibility in history. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Marco, for this very interesting talk. Now is the turn for Professor Debbie James to maybe provide some comments or questions. David, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
All right, well, thank you, Marco, for a very informative and interesting talk, and also for the full paper that I read. I found your account of the historical context very convincing, and also your account of Fichte's aims. So I'm not going to raise any objections to that. I do have a few points which concern possible implications the position you attribute to Fichte, which, as I say, I think is right. And also how this relates to his reading of Machiavelli, what he was trying to achieve. So it seems to me that one way in which you think he uses Machiavelli, or where he thinks Machiavelli is right, is that the Machiavelli, or in Machiavelli's writings, we have a realistic and pragmatic approach to international relations. And this is something that Fichte, at least in this historical point, thinks is necessary. That Prussia finds itself in a position where it really needs to have a much more realistic perspective on its relations to Napoleonic France in particular, and to take the necessary actions. And in the full paper, you didn't mention this in the talk, but I think this is important. You seem to reject the position that Renaud and Ferry adopt, where they seem to say, well, we have this shift in Fichte's thinking. He ends up adopting this kind of nationalistic patriotism and endorses mere power politics, and that's reflected in his interest in Machiavelli. And I think it's right to reject that reading. That doesn't seem to be true to Fichte's intentions. But nevertheless, there may be an issue with this, and I'll come to this shortly. But you point to two sentences. So there's one claim that Fichte makes in relation to Machiavelli's writings. So he says there are two sentences that one should never forget, and these sentences might be summarized as follows. So one, if a neighboring state is not a natural ally, it will always be ready at the first opportunity to enlarge itself. So it will attack with a view to expanding its territory. And so then any neighboring state that's not a natural ally poses a threat to one's own state. And the second claim is very broadly, one must therefore be aware of this threat posed by other states. One must always keep in view this threat and take any necessary steps to deal with it. So these seem to be the two sentences that Fichte thinks we should never forget, and that Machiavelli really understands these two demands. So one question is, in relation to the first claim about this idea that any state poses a threat to one's own state's existence. What is the status of this claim here? So does it concern some kind of universally valid truth? So is it true of every state? Every state poses this kind of threat, irrespective of what type of state it is. So it's not just absolute monarchies, it's not just Napoleonic France, which, as you point out, Fichte associates with the idea of universal monarchy. Rather, any state would pose such a threat, even a republic with a rational constitution. Or is it just limited to a certain type of state? There are certain types of states that exhibit this tendency to expand whenever they have the opportunity to do so. Now, in Fichte's defense of the French Revolution from 1793, he clearly associates this with absolute monarchies. There he talks about universal monarchy, which he later associates with Napoleon. But there's no suggestion there that other states, states with a rational constitution, would seek to expand in the same way. Indeed, the suggestion seems to be, and here he has something in common with Kant, that if you had a state with a republican constitution, it would coexist peacefully with other states. or it would tend to coexist peacefully. So here the question is, if, or what do you think about this, that if Fichte really endorses the first claim in a very strong sense, that any state poses a threat, then how is this reconcilable with his cosmopolitanism? Or do you think he rejects cosmopolitanism completely in his later writings? But I think even in the address to the German nation, there are certain passages in which he suggests, well, all this is really about achieving in the end sort of peace in Europe or whatever. So I think that's maybe one implication what one could explore. And also the answer you give to this question seems to be important, because if you say he does mean any state, then it looks like Renaud and Ferry are actually right. He does reject his earlier cosmopolitanism. And a second issue concerns the relationship between means and ends here. So I think if you read Fichte as some kind of cosmopolitanism, some kind of cosmopolitan, and the whole idea is about establishing some kind of rational, legal, and political order which will coexist peacefully with other states with the same order, then one might argue, well, the ideas or the aims, the ultimate aims, somehow constrain the means. How could you endorse just seeking power for its own sake, for example? You know, what one might think, well, actually, if we want a cosmopolitan order, it has to be achieved in a certain way. The way we achieve this will influence the outcome or the possibility of achieving what we're aiming at. So I was wondering if you think that Fichte's engagement with Machiavelli would be qualified by the way in which the ends to be achieved constrain the means. Or in fact, maybe, I mean, on certain readings of Machiavelli, one could say, well, it's a misunderstanding of Machiavelli to think that it's just about getting power for its own sake and doing anything that's necessary to get power. Actually, power is itself a means to an end. It's a means of establishing and preserving a republic. So perhaps in a way, Fichte and Machiavelli are quite close here. And the third and final issue concerns the identity of the Zwingherr. So one could, hold on, I'll just get my notes here. So with in relation to some of the things you say about the Zwingherr, it seems that it could seem that the Zwingherr is always an existing ruler. So it would be, for example, Friedrich Wilhelm III. But on the other hand, you suggest that the Zwingherr will have knowledge of a kind of rational, juridical, and political order. And here I think the analogy with Rousseau's legislator is quite helpful, because the legislator is introduced in the social contract in order to explain how a society that's in accordance with the principles of the social contract could be established in the first place. I mean, the assumption here is that people wouldn't be able to recognize the good. And so you need this figure from outside who basically sets up some kind of basic constitution. And by living under such a constitution, people come to develop insight into a rational, legal, and political order. So here this presupposes that the legislator has the relevant form of knowledge. And I think in some sense that's true of Fichte's Zwingherr. And then it looks like it can't be the existing ruler. The existing ruler would only just be a means of achieving this. So I'll try and explain what I mean here using an example from the longer, well, I think actually you mentioned this in the talk. So I'm not a historian, so I'm I'm not sure the historical details are completely right here. But as far as I remember, because of the situation Prussia was in, there were certain reformers who wanted to introduce some kind of people's army and to reform the military in Prussia. And there was some resistance on the part of the monarchs, well, in this case, Friedrich Wilhelm III, because of the case of the French Revolution. In the case of the French Revolution, you had the levée en masse, this sort of popular army, and it was really effective. But of course, it went together with the principles of the French Revolution. So it was seen as some kind of revolutionary idea that was quite dangerous. So insofar as Friedrich Wilhelm III did agree to this, it seems it was a matter of necessity. It was the only way in which Prussia had a chance of sort of defeating Napoleonic France. So it's not as if Friedrich Wilhelm III acted with the intention of making the people free and so on. If that happened, which historically doesn't seem to be the case immediately afterwards, then it would have been an unintended consequence. Whereas it seems in the case of Fichte's Zwingherr, there's this conscious aim of establishing a rational legal and political order and thereby making people free. It's just, you have to use coercion to do that, or a certain amount of coercion. You have to have power in order to undertake the relevant measures and so on. So I was wondering here whether there's a question about who exactly is the Zwingherr. I mean, is it perhaps Fichte himself, if he had political power? Or is it some kind of combination of an existing ruler and the philosopher? So it's not a philosopher king in the sense that wisdom and power are united in one person. Rather, the philosopher informs the existing ruler and so on. So, well, those are the points I had to make.
Thank you, Professor James, for that question. Marcus, you want maybe to reply briefly, not that long to David?
Thank you very much. The questions are very important, very problematic. Yeah. I don't know if I have a real answer to these questions, but see, to the 3 points. Let's say the interpretations from Renaud and Ferry. It's full of problems, of misunderstanding. What does absolutism is? What does the Machiavelli means? What does the Hobbes means? Is the shift is claimed, but at the same time is denied. The Machiavellization is laid. I think that Radicania enough criticizes the way, but the point remains, the point of the cosmopolitanism. I think that Fichte, with a slogan, I like to define him as a pragmatic idealist. What I mean? I mean that the problems in 1870 was the independence of Prussia. That was later comes. The perspective is real. So the government is jeopardy. The situation is very dangerous. So we are losing our freedom. Then Machiavelli can help to understand, and can help to understand the problem of the politics of Hohenzollern, of the hypocrisy, of the political, say, ideological horizon of the Hohenzollern. That's the point, see, the rehabilitation of Machiavelli against the anti-Machiavelli. And that was also the political foundation of the politics of the Hohenzollern. Friedrich the Große was the authority, moral authority for the king, but also for the advisors. And it's the point, see, Fichte goals is to influence the advisors of the king, the public. Then it's the point that permits, that allows to think that he is acting as natural effort in the situation. What's the point to say? Against is Napoleon. Napoleon is betrayed as the French revolution principle, to show that the rules, the law, is not enough. In 1783 or 84, Fichte states that the French Revolution was important on the moral dimension. That yet there was a point to say, is this a declaration of rights? But we have to do something to realize this right. Was announced, but not realized. Then I tried to find also a coherence in the perspective of Fichte. I think that in the turn point, as the change with the Machiavelli essay, is that this element of counter-interpellation comes out. In the Zurückforderung was shown an appeal, a claim, a call to the kings of Europe, but was still in the frame of Kant's answer to the question, what is enlightenment? To persuading, respecting the law, to suggest. But here, with the Machiavelli, and then, so you know better than me about the addresses to the German nation, that take the point of the natural effort in the sense of calling for a revolution. For a revolution, the point is important point is to a constituent process. And here comes in play the question of the Zwingherr. The Zwingherr is a political act to introduce into the possibilities a new one. And the new one is following. The king, you have to call the war. The people, by fighting, will receive rights. The contract of citizenship in the foundation, contributing to build states that provides rights to people, they not yet have rights. The war produce rights for the people engaged in the war. And the risk is the manipulation of the people, because is all wanted to fight for the liberation against Napoleon. But what is the goal? We have to discuss the goal, and that will make the difference in our engagement. The point is that fighting for the independence is right only if we are going to build a state, kingdom, according to the right enlightened by the Wissenschaftslehre.
Marco, could you quickly conclude, please, so we can go to the Q&A?
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Then it's always political imagination to this point. Then as a short is so the I think that the question is not monarchy or republic. So here, republic means the government of the law, and against the despotism. I think that is the two categories that played more important role. Manuel.
Thank you, Marco, for this reply. Well, we will start the Q&A. So please, if you have questions, use the raise your hand option here in the Zoom meeting, or you can also write your question in the chat, and I will read it out loud. So, I don't know, Karin?
Yes, thank you, Marco, for this very interesting talk. As you know, I'm not at all specialist, but I was struck by your comments on this notion of Zwingher. And you indicated repeatedly that, according to you, it is a kind of semantic neologism. And so I was a bit puzzled about this, because I think that for Fichte, as for almost everyone else, the primary aim of an oral or written communication is to get the message across. And so the term Zwingher seems to be very ambivalent or hard to understand, and so is very likely to be interpreted in the wrong manner. So why would Fichte deliberately choose this antiquated term in order to make a point, whereas maybe other options were available to him? Isn't this a bit puzzling or even irritating? Yes, that he throws this term to his readers or audience, whereas he could have known that they were most likely not able to get his point.
Thank you. It could be wrong with the choice, but the point is these strategies that also James David point out in his book of use of languages, and the point here is to build the lead as a German as living languages and the memories of the tradition. Then Zwingher as a meaning in the Middle Age, and can express an autochthon authority that is not thought through the concept categories of the French thought, of the English thought, etc. Then it's the point, is it, in a patriotic way, to call something that is only present in the German tradition. And we know that this German tradition does not exist. The German nation is something to build. Does not exist a German people. Are people that speak German. That's the point, the starting point. And we have the possibility through the war against Napoleon to build this nation. And that this nation accomplished what the French nation did not accomplish because of Napoleon. I think that goes in this direction, but I agree with the point that Zwinger is it's not very a super definition, but in a transition can be useful, and the king has this power of constraint, Zwinger. But at the same time, the goal is another.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. And Luis, do you have a question? One of you have to be.
Yeah. So, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So thank you so much, Marco. It was very, very interesting, and I am very sympathetic to the overall perspective of reading Fichte from the point of view of the Aufforderung. I think that it works for applied philosophy, and I think it works also for the Wissenschaftslehre. I think his theoretical philosophy also goes in this direction, and I think you agree with me on that. And I'm also sympathetic to the comparison you make between the Zwingherr and the Erfurter. However, I have a question about this, because I don't know. You correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if I remember it correctly, but I think the Erfurter plays a role in limiting the constituted powers, because it can, to a certain extent, it's not the ruler itself, and it can, in exceptional situations, even maybe even overthrow the ruler or call into question his power. So when you say that the Zwingherr could perhaps be the ruler, it strikes me as going or potentially something that could go in a very dangerous direction, because if the ruler is the Zwingherr, he could be a temporary dictator, and it sounds to me as not really realistic if you think that he will be just for a very limited time someone who is imposing the direction of the country, and then it will be fine, he will go away. So the effort seems to me much more realistic in the sense that it is limiting constituted powers, and the Zwingherr, it seems to be a little bit more dangerous, at least. But maybe I'm wrong on this. I just wanted to know what you think about this.
Thank you, Luis. The point, Fichte is acting as natural effort. No, Friedrich Wilhelm III. The point is, the efforts no more as part of the constitution than Fichte, yet in the foundation speaks for about natural effort that it calls the revolution, and it depends from the people if it's right or not. Then in the doctrine of the right in Berlin said effort as part of the constitution is not adequate, appropriate to all times, but still talks about the natural effort as public wise or gelatin. And the suggestion is that he is acting, managing the finger as natural effort. Why? Because he's trying to give the direction of politics. He's trying to persuade the government to do the best thing, and at the same time to form the public opinion that can help to give the direction even to the government. That's the effort to say comes here in play.
Okay, just a very quick follow-up. So the Zwingherr would be the philosopher, or the Zwingherr would be the ruler?
The Zwingherr is the king.
Is the king. Okay.
It's Friedrich. It can only be Friedrich Wilhelm, but it is not as king. It can become a Zwingherr to Deutschland. It's wichtig. It's important to say when he introduced this constituent process. That's the point. That's the point. When I talk about this, I think about Althusser's interpretation of Prince. Prince's political act is to introduce a new possibility in the juncture, and the new prince does not exist. It is necessary that one of the existing princes recognize it as his own mission. Then he will become the new prince. And a little point, legislator, in connection with the fourth type of the law, that is acting on the motivation of the citizens. And this is most important, to build a people. So the legislator as the actor that introduce the possibility to produce a common will, a common intention. It does not impose it to the other. That is the point. It's very
interesting. Lucas, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Manu, and thank you all for the possibility to participate, and thank you, Marco, particularly for the seminar. I was hoping if you can, Marco, go a bit farther into, that was my question, you have already said something about it, but maybe go a bit deeper into with which kind of relation we can establish between the perspectives of Fichte in the Zurückforderung der Denkfreiheit, and this text on Machiavelli regarding Fichte's intention of how to say influence the advisors of the kings, of the governors. And if I guess you said something like there's a difference between his position in the Zurückforderung and now here, with all those years gone by, and how the French Revolution turned out. And well, maybe another word on that subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. Lucas is the Zurückforderung is against the edict of religion's edict. And the point is that the important point in my opinion is that Fichte used the doctrine of natural right to found an instance to the government. I think that at the time it remains in the horizon of Kant. Now, Kant answer to the question, what is enlightenment? Of persuading the king to do something. But recognize that king is the only possibility in Prussia at the time. Later, this constitutive process, the war, the liberation war, is another scenario that opens the concrete possibility to constituent process. And then the last discourse addressed to the German nation is called as a different category of the society to build these people. Everyone is a particular determined call to build something different. The shift is there, and the king can participate or not. The war of liberation is technically a revolution, a change. That's this.
Thank you, Marco. We have maybe time for last question. Jimena?
Well, thank you. I'm Marco. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to see you. I would ask you to say something more about this war of revolution. I had some questions in the same in the same direction as Lucas. So I wanted to ask you about this well, change, but also continuity between Fichte of the revolutionary texts and this later Fichte under attack and under the colonizing efforts of Napoleon. So my main question would be if that project of a revolution that leads the people to freedom is still Fichte's aim, and what would be the role of education in that project? Because with this in the discourses, education is a central issue, but it is also in the revolutionary writings. So even though the situation has completely changed and Fichte's position has obviously also changed, if we could find some continuity in this educational project.
Thank you very much for the question. I think that the point is enlightened from Fichte in the foundation. The limits of the ephorate as part of the constitution. And that's point of persuading the king to do something. Later, the king is not very good. After the freedom is lost, Prussia is occupied, then this change is important. This is the last call to the king in Machiavelli. Yet in the addresses is the constitution of the people directly as natural effort can call the people, the assembly, to judge the government. That's technically a revolution. But the question of the education is the criterion. The Zwinger zu Deutschland distinguishes it to form a better view of the present. It's problem of enthusiasm of the war of liberation, the blindness that is involved. Must be clear what the goal is. And that is the point that Fichte decided to give lectures on applied philosophy. I can help my students to understand what should be the real goal of this world. I can be wrong, say that, wrote he, but it's the risk, and it's the real point. And as intellectual, he said, I don't go to war to fight, but I can help by enlightening the situation, the challenges. That's the point. This is the education. Education is on the present. You can enlighten the present when you have a right the understanding of the situation. I think that's the point. And the constitutive process is a process of education of new nations. The addresses to the German nation as an important part, most important part, about national education. I think that remains is not in question.
Marco, I don't know if there is any other question or comments. But if not, we can maybe conclude here our formal part of our meeting. So I would like to thank again Marco and David for the talk and the discussion about these very fascinating topics. And of course, you are invited to stay in this more informal conversation once we stop the recording. So thank you again, and see you maybe in the next sessions of the Leuven seminar for those that are leaving now. Thank you.